اسٹوڈنٹس، آج ہمارا ٹاپک جو ہے پاکستان سے آئیڈیالوجیکل پروجیکٹ کے حوالے سے ہے کہ کس طریقے سے نظریہ پاکستان جو ہے اس کا اوریجنیشن ہوا ہے، کس طرح اس کا آغاز ہوا ہے اور کس طریقے سے مسلمانان ہند نے اپنے ایک علیحدہ تشخص کو اجاگر کر کے ایک ایسا نظریہ جو تھا اس کو اخذ کیا ہے، اور اخذ کرنے کے بعد اس پروجیکٹ کے اوپر کس طریقے سے پریکٹیکلی ہمارے پولیٹیکل لیڈرز نے محمد علی جناح اور علامہ اقبال کا جو کانسیپٹ تھا اور دیگر جو ہمارے تھنکرز تھے ان کی مختلف قسم کی جو آراء تھیں، ان کی روشنی میں اس پروجیکٹ کے اوپر ایک ایسی عمارت تعمیر کی ہے جس کا نام پاکستان ہے۔ پاکستان آئیڈیالوجی جو ہے وہ ہندوستان کے اندر مسلمانوں کے ایک علیحدہ تشخص کی علامت ہے، ایک علیحدہ تشخص کے حوالے سے مسلمانان ہند کو ایک نئی منزل کے تعین کے لیے مشعل راہ کی حیثیت رکھتی ہے۔ پاکستان آئیڈیالوجی کے بغیر ہم اس پروجیکٹ کو کمپلیٹ نہیں کر سکتے تھے۔ ہمارے لیڈرز نے اسی آئیڈیالوجی کے تحت ہندوستان کے اندر ٹو نیشن تھیوری، دو قومی نظریے کے اوپر کام کیا ہے، اور ہندوستان کے اندر کے مسلمان اور ہندو دو الگ الگ قومیں ہیں، دونوں کے درمیان ایک تفاوت، ایک فرق اور ایک امتیاز یا ڈسٹنکشن موجود ہے، جس کی بنیاد کے اوپر دونوں ممالک جو ہیں وہ رائٹ آف سیلف ڈٹرمنیزم کا جو ایک انٹرنیشنل اصول ہے اس کے تحت ہندوستان کو دو حصوں میں تقسیم کر کے علیحدہ وطن کا مطالبہ مسلمانوں کے لیے کامیاب ہو سکتا ہے۔ تو لہذا پاکستان آئیڈیالوجی کی ہسٹری کو اگر ہم دیکھتے ہیں تو اس میں بڑی جینیسس کے حوالے سے جب ہم اس کا جائزہ لیتے ہیں تو کچھ چیزیں ہمیں انڈرسٹینڈنگ دیتی ہیں کہ کس طریقے سے اس آئیڈیالوجی کو ایک پریکٹیکل آئیڈیالوجی کی شکل میں ڈھالا گیا ہے۔ When Pakistan came into being in August 1947 on the back of what its founders called the two-nation theory. The theory was called two-nation because one nation, that was the Hindu, and a second, that was the Muslim. And the theory was called from the 19th century writings of modernist Muslim reformers in India, who, after the collapse of the Muslim empire in South Asia, began to explain the region's Muslims as a separate political and cultural entity, especially compared to the Hindu majority of India. This scholarly nuance, inspired by the idea of the nation-state, first introduced in the region by British colonialists, gradually evolved into becoming a pursuit to prepare a well-educated and resourceful Muslim middle class in the region. Eventually, with the help from sections of the Muslim landed elite in India, the emerging Muslim middle classes turned the idea into a movement for a separate Muslim homeland in South Asia, comprised of those areas where the Muslims were in a majority. This is what we today understand to be the Pakistan movement. However, when the country's founding father, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a Western educated lawyer and head of the All India Muslim League, navigated the movement towards finally reaching its goal of carving out a separate Muslim homeland in South Asia, he was soon faced with an awkward fact. There were almost as many Muslims, if not more, in India than they were in the newly created Muslim majority country of Pakistan. Jinnah was conscious of this fact when he delivered his first major address at the new country's Constituent Assembly on August 11, 1947. Though, during the movement, some factions of his party, especially in the Punjab and the former NWFP, Northwestern Frontier Province, had tweaked the two-nation theory to also mean that the Muslims of India desired an Islamic state. Jinnah was quick to see the contradiction in this claim simply because millions of Muslims had either been left behind in India or had refused to migrate to Pakistan. Islam during the movement was largely used as a cultural and quasi-ethnic proposition to furnish and flex the Muslim separate nationhood claims. It was never used as a doctrinal roadmap to construct a theoretic state in South Asia. In his August 11 speech, Jinnah clearly declared that in Pakistan, the state will have nothing to do with the matters of the faith, and Pakistan was supported to become a democratic Muslim majority nation state. Within the Muslim community in Pakistan were various Muslim sects and subsects with their own understanding and interpretations of the faith. Then the country also had multiple ethnicities, cultures, and languages. Keeping all this in mind, Jinnah's speech made good sense and exhibited a remarkable understanding of the complexities that his new country had inherited. But many of his close colleagues were still in the movement mode. Not only because the Pakistan movement was a fresh memory, but also because when the Muslim League became the first ruling party of the country, it had to constantly evoke faith in places like the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the former NWFP, where the Pakhtun nationalists had refused to join Pakistan. Also another region, Kashmir, having a Muslim majority but an aristocratic Hindu regime, had controversially opted to stay out of the Pakistan Federation. So a number of League members thought that with his August 11 speech, Jinnah was a bit too hasty in discarding the religious factor and opting to explain the new country as a multicultural Muslim majority state, even though these leaders too had very little idea exactly what would be the ideological makeup of the country. Jinnah died in 1948, leaving behind a huge leadership vacuum in a country that had apparently appeared on the map a lot sooner than it was anticipated to be, even those who had been striving hard for its creation. The leadership of the founding party, the Muslim League, was mostly made up of Punjab's landed gentry and Muhajir Urdu-speaking bourgeoisie elite. The bureaucracy was also dominated by these two communities, whereas the army had an overwhelming Punjabi majority. Either the multicultural connotations of Jinnah's speech were not entirely understood by his immediate colleagues, or was simply sidelined by them. These connotations somewhat threatened the League's leadership because the Bengalis of East Pakistan were the majority ethnic group in the new country, and the democratic recognition of multiculturalism and ethnic diversity of Pakistan would have automatically translated into Bengalis becoming the main ruling group. After Jinnah had promptly watered down the religious aspects of the Pakistan movement, the League's leadership that followed his unfortunate death in 1948 decided to reintroduce these aspects to negate the multicultural tenor of Jinnah's speech. But things in this respect get even more complicated when one is reminded of how it was actually Jinnah who triggered the first serious expression of ethnic turmoil in Pakistan. In March 1948, Jinnah delivered 2 speeches in Dhaka, the largest city of the Bengali-dominated East Pakistan. The speeches were delivered in English and were made at the height of a raging debate within the ruling Muslim League on the question of country's national language. Bengali leadership in the League had proposed the Bengali language on the basis that Bengalis were the largest ethnic group in Pakistan. However, the party's Muhajir members, led by one of Jinnah's closest colleagues, Liaquat Ali Khan, who was also Pakistan's first Prime Minister, disagreed by claiming that Pakistan was made on the demands of 100 million Muslims of India and that the language of these Muslims was Urdu. Of course, it was conveniently forgotten that quite a large section of these millions of Urdu-speaking Muslims had been left behind in India and that at the time of Pakistan's inception, Urdu was spoken by less than 10% Pakistanis. Faced with this dilemma and aggressively pushed by the arguments of Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan to declare Urdu as the national language, Jinnah arrived in Dhaka and in his 2 speeches, they insisted that indeed Urdu was to become the country's national lingua franca. Bengalis went on strike and had widespread demonstrations, but Urdu did become the national language. The Bengalis, a resentment found immediate sympathizers within other non-Punjabi and non-Muhajir ethnic communities. Sindhi, Pashtun, and eventually Baloch intelligentsia were alarmed by the way the state and government had treated the Bengalis' demands and foresaw the same happening to their own languages and cultures. The government, instead of anticipating future fissures in the country on ethnic lines, became even more myopic and wallowed in its self-serving naivety about using faith as a slogan that was supposed to dissolve ethnic nationalism among the Muslim majority of the country. Slogans underlined by faith might have worked to effectively pull together the Muslim minority of various ethnicities of India during the Pakistan movement. There was no guarantee that it would be able to do the same in a country where the same Muslims had become an overwhelming majority. Ideally, a system and constitution advocating democracy should have been worked out to facilitate and streamline the political and cultural participation of all ethnicities in the nation-building process. But this was not done. After Jinnah's demise, political and cultural expressions of ethnicity were immediately treated as being threats to the unity of the nation. Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, though steeped in the modernist Muslim tradition of Sir Sayyid's Aligarh school of thought, was, however, willing to continue to use religion selectively to maintain the cherished unity of the Muslim majority of Pakistan. He was not the son of the soul, meaning, unlike most Sindhis, Pashtuns, Punjabis, Baloch, and Bengalis, Liaquat was born outside of what eventually became Pakistan, did not have a large constituency based on language and ethnicity in the new country. So it is understandable why the notion of Islam being a unifying factor was important to him, as well as to most other Muhajirs of the country. But the question was, what kind of Islam? The question had not really mattered during the Pakistan movement, in which the Muslims of South Asia were agitating as a minority. But then, when a large part of this minority became a majority in Pakistan, the historical, political, and theological divisions and crevices between these majorities, many sects and subsects began to seem starker than before. The Muslim League brought down the theories of Muslim nationalism that evolved from the scholarly works of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and philosopher and poet Muhammad Iqbal had understood all the Muslim sects and subsects of South Asia to be a community united by various doctrinal and political commonalities and a rich history of conquest and scientific and cultural achievements. After lamenting the decadent state the Muslim community had slipped into after the fall of the Muslim Empire in India, these men pointed towards renewed and updated look at Islam. Such an exercise to them would help revive the political, social and economic vitality of the community. To men like Liaquat Ali Khan, Pakistan was to be explained as the organic culmination and natural result of what Sir Syed and especially Iqbal had been contemplating and advocating. It was to make all ethnicities and sectarian differences secondary compared to the precepts of Pakistani nationhood. But what exactly was this nationhood about? A good part of the answer first came from a man who during the Pakistan movement had actually denounced Jinnah. Islamic scholar and founder of the Jamaat-e-Islami, Abu Ala Maududi, was not an Islamic cleric or was an Islamic cleric, the great. He was a well-read and prolific journalist and author, though his commentaries in this respect were highly conservative. His was a radical conservatism because not only did he challenge the Muslim nationalism of the likes of Jinnah, claiming nationalism had no place in Islam, he even managed to offend many scholars belonging to Sunni subsects by accusing them of being wedged in ancient clerical traditions and distorting the true message of Islam through unsavory innovations. To him, the Muslims' renewal as a political and cultural force depended not on Muslim nationalism but on an evolutionary process across all Muslim societies in which the people were to be Islamized from below so that they could be prepared for Islamic laws, Sharia, imposed from above the state. So it was ironic when Liaquat and his aides, after being confronted by the grumblings of ethnic nationalists, agreed to adopt a portion of Maududi's thesis on political Islam while passing the 1949 Objectives Resolutions in the Constituent Assembly. The resolution was supposed to be an outline of what the final constitution of the country should look and sound like, and also what Pakistani nationhood should be about. Just a year and a half after Jinnah had described Pakistan to be a pluralistic Muslim majority state, the resolution declared Pakistan to be an Islamic entity. Maududi's JI decided to end its boycott of conducting politics in Pakistan after the resolution, despite the fact that the resolution did not translate into meaning that the government would begin to legislate Sharia laws immediately or was even willing to. The government might have thought that it had successfully defined the final points of Pakistani nationhood through the resolution, but things in this context got even more complex. In 1951, Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated, and in 1954, vicious riots erupted in Punjab against the Ahmadiyya community when Jamaat-e-Islami and another party, the Majlis-e-Ahrar, demanded that the community be declared non-Muslim for holding heretical views. The military had to be called in and it crushed the riots with an iron hand. It arrested a number of Jamaat-e-Islami Ahrar leaders and Maududi was sentenced to hang for inciting the riots. The judgment was later reversed. In 1956, the Constituent Assembly, made up of indirectly elected members of the Muslim League and the Republican Party, got down to finally another country's first constitution. In the constitution, the non-Punjabi and non-Muhajir ethnic nationalists were appeased with the promise of direct elections based on adult franchise, while the religious parties were given the space to define Pakistan as an Islamic republic.